The Fellowship of the Ring is just one of those miracle movies, the likes of which we will probably never see again. Let's talk about why it's such a unicorn of a film and whip up a towering inferno of a cocktail called the Eye of Sauron, today on The Martini Shot. So normally on this channel, we just review the latest movies, but I've been wanting to shake things up and maybe talk about some older movies I really love and some that I haven't seen yet. And since this year is the Fellowship of the Ring's 25th anniversary, I found it fitting to talk about it and ring in 2026 with our very first cocktail of the year, the Eye of Sauron. The towering flaming eyeball is represented with a tall, spicy drink that combines the lovely flavor of blood orange and a nice spice from hot sauce and pepper liqueur. It's refreshing with a nice little tingle of heat. Much better than whatever slop they're serving the Urukai and Isengard. Let's get into it. All right, go ahead and grab yourself a cocktail shaker. We're gonna be needing 2 different juices for this. First, let's start with some lime juice at 1/2 ounce, and follow it up with some fresh blood orange juice at 3/4 ounces. And for our sweetening agent, we're gonna be using a little bit of grenadine. This is gonna help sweeten it up and also give it a nice red color. And you're only gonna be needing about 1/4 ounce. And now moving into our alcoholic ingredients, first we're gonna be using a little bit of Ancho Reyes chili liqueur. You're only gonna be needing 1/2 ounce. And for our main spirit, we're gonna be utilizing gin at 2 ounces. And for our final ingredient, here you can get a little customizable. We're gonna be using some hot sauce. Feel free to play around, try different hot sauces, maybe adjust the amount of dashes you put in. But for this cocktail, I'm gonna be using Tabasco just because it has a more pronounced pepper flavor, and I'm gonna be throwing in 3 dashes. All right, let's go ahead and get some ice in our shaker and shake to chill. So after that, go ahead and fill a tall glass with ice and strain your cocktail into it. And then for a little bit of body, you can top it with a little bit of soda water. And then to make the Eye of Sauron garnish, you're gonna be needing a slice of blood orange and a maraschino cherry. And all you have to do is just carefully skewer those 2 together with a pick and place it right on top of your cocktail. And there you go, now you have the Eye of Sauron. It's nice and refreshing, but still from the get-go, punches you in the back of the throat with a little bit of spice. And this will vary depending on what hot sauce you end up using, how much you end up using. But I think that pairing of the Tabasco and the Ancho Reyes really makes for a fine combination. It pairs so well with the sweetness of the blood orange and the lime. And the reason why I went with gin is just because naturally I think those botanical notes pair very well alongside those fruit flavors and even the spice flavors. It's not nearly as imposing as the real thing, but I do think it still gets the job done. Now that we have our drink, let's talk about Fellowship of the Ring. So we're gonna do something a little different today. Normally the cocktail is followed up by a review, but honestly, what more can really be said about Fellowship of the Ring? The first section of J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy masterwork was a huge gamble even back in the day. The story behind the production of this thing is incredibly interesting, and when you learn more about how this thing was made, you really start to realize how far we've been removed from this level of Hollywood. Sure, technologies have advanced and many things have been made easier, but there's just something missing from nearly every movie that has tried to capture the grandness and the glory of this thing. And no, this isn't gonna be a modern movies are bad video. I'm not clinging to the past while being unwilling to engage with the future, but there's gotta be a reason that nothing has given audiences the same feeling as Fellowship of the Ring did, and probably never will again. First and foremost, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy was based around the vision and the direction of one man, Peter Jackson. There was no committee, brand managers, or suit and ties assembled to build this thing. They trusted Jackson and they gave him complete creative control. Now, don't get it twisted. Jackson is not the sole reason for this film being as incredible as it is. You have to give credit to people like Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens who helped adapt the original book to film. It's not a one-for-one adaptation, and as someone who has read the first book, that's kind of for the best. This thing definitely needed to be streamlined in order to make it relatively compact and sensible, and that is certainly no easy feat. Pour one out, Tom Bombadil fans. Our man's been erased from history. But someone else you need to give props to is, and I kid you not, the studio. Normally we see studios as the most meddling enemies of art under the sun, but back in the 90s there was still a semblance of humanity to them. Jackson and his team originally were wanting to adapt the book into separate films, but the studio actually pushed to make it a trilogy, that way it could be shot back to back to back and keep the full creative idea intact. And there was no safety net either. Those movies were happening whether or not they were a success. Nowadays, studios are canceling finished movies before they even hit the screen, but this was even a bit of an unprecedented move back in the day. This was produced by New Line Cinemas, who at the time were mostly known for their low-budget horror movie staples. Evil Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Austin Powers. These were the movies that they were mostly known for, not sweeping fantasy epics. The same could be said about Peter Jackson. Before this, he was making scrappy independents like Bad Taste and, personal favorite of mine, Brain Dead. But Jackson was impassioned, having been working on the treatments and storyboards for this thing for years as it jumped through many different distributors before finding a home at New Line. And you know, filmmaking was changing. Jurassic Park had just come out and totally redefined what was possible with special effects. Now was the time to do this, and Peter was ready to put his whole Peter into this. But some of the most work that was done for this film happened before the cameras even started rolling. This thing had about 2 to 3 years of pre-production, which is absolutely nuts to think about. Nowadays, you already need to have the movie half made before you can convince a partner to help finance it. But Jackson and his team were given the time and resources to make this thing as perfect as they could. From the costumes, to the environments, to the languages, everything was given an ample amount of time to develop before anyone ever pressed record. It's insane to think about this happening today, especially considering this was still a huge gamble for all parties involved. And a big reason why this film still holds up today is that level of craft. There's a timelessness to it that works wonders, and I don't know if there's a single shot in this that doesn't have something to be impressed by. Miniatures and bigatures gave these grand, otherworldly settings so much groundedness and life, while the New Zealand countryside was equal amounts of beauty and empty to really build a staggering fantasy world from the ground up in. While technologies like Weta allowed the filmmakers to craft huge armies without the need for millions of extras, the team still had to be creative in how it approached legitimizing what audiences would see on screen. There's no better example than with how they used force perspective to make someone appear larger or smaller than they are. Today, and even back then, many would just stitch the actors into the scene and hope everything looked natural. That nearly killed Ian McKellen, and I'm glad they held off on doing that for at least most of this. But we've talked about the work and the care that went into this, but honestly, so many people are watching movies without even thinking about that stuff. So what really makes this a timeless classic in the eyes of the common viewer? Well, for one, there's a true sincerity behind it. Movies are so bogged down today in irony and this winking and nodding BS that almost makes them feel like they're embarrassed to be here. But not with this film. Every Uggo orc or weird little goblin feels just as emotionally intertwined with the film as our heroes. The film isn't afraid to be vulnerable and true to itself, and yet it still finds a way to capture that mythical quality that can be found in tales from every known civilization. The idea of deconstructing heroes and legends wasn't really in the cards at the time, so going full-fledged into its universal themes of friendship, sacrifice, and temptation was the only hope it had. These fantasy characters are given room to not just be archetypes, but to grow and change and evolve in the world right before our eyes, because their emotional development is just as important as seeing a quest go from point A to point B. Frodo is the centerpiece here, and it's the reason that probably makes this my favorite in the trilogy. In my opinion, it perfectly captures the idea that even the smallest heart can change the world if given support and love. And every single side character still feels integral. Samwise stands to keep Frodo grounded with one of the most endearing bromances in cinematic history. Aragorn and Gandalf breathe a sigh of confidence into an otherwise daunting journey. Legolas is mostly just there to aura farm, but we love him for it. Everyone works effortlessly in filling out this world without the need for excessive exposition or explaining to the audience. Except for the opening, but it's one of the best openings in film ever, so what can you do? I really got an itch for Lord of the Rings a few years ago, and I've been chasing their high ever since. Sure, there's some older films like Dragon Slayer to discover that shows this kind of film has always been in the zeitgeist, but when I look to more modern offerings, nothing compares. This was not something a studio could just decide to do one year and have it done by the next. this took a significant period of nurturement that Hollywood just doesn't want to fully take a risk on. Avatar is probably the closest that comes to mind, and Dune probably isn't too far behind, but even now, I fear for how long those films can continue to get the treatment not offered to many in this day and age. And nowadays, everything's gotta shake up the culture. It's gotta give you the next big memeable screen grab or spawn a dozen spin-offs and sequels. But Fellowship wasn't made to trend, it was made to endure, and endure it has. With the combination of a risk-taking studio, a passionate director, a unified team, and all the patience and trust in the world, Fellowship of the Ring and the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a whole is true lightning in the bottle kind of stuff. Modern movies can still reach these heights, but the conditions in which this thing was made are long gone, and I don't think they're ever coming back. This is one of those 5 rings out of 5 kind of movies, something that will continue to stand the test of time, no matter how hard Amazon tries to kill it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Martini Shot. If you have seen Fellowship of the Ring, which I'm sure a lot of you had, let me know what your thoughts on it are down in the comments. And if you like what you saw here and would like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me across all social media channels. Those links are down in the description below. And if you enjoy movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails, be sure to check out my website, martinishot.blog. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly.